what somebody like Governor DeSantis is doing, it's obvious what he's doing. He's trying to appeal to the most right-wing Christian nationalist voter, particularly in places like Iowa. Interestingly enough, his rhetoric is not working in New Hampshire. What a shock.
Shocking.
But because of the fact that in rural and deep South America, it's not that it's an overwhelming majority of people who think like this, but there's still a segment of this population that do think like this, and they vote in every election. So by getting their attention, he thinks that this is going to help him. The problem is that with technology, now everybody gets to see what good old Governor DeSantis has to say to try to win over the lowest common denominator. And it looks like it's ultimately going to cost him politically. But your thoughts, especially as it pertains to Black erasure with what the new state curriculum in Florida that the GOP is trying to do.
Absolutely. So there's so much wrong with those standards. One, how they were created and why they were created. They're an ideological project. It's not about education, it's about indoctrination. And that ideological project is to basically whitewash American history, teach American history as if the United States came out fully formed, fully perfect. And therefore, all the claims about injustices, about inequalities, inequities, about systemic racism, they're just folks hollering, just folks making noise. These are folks who don't want to do the work because this is the land of opportunity. And so it allows to treat systemic issues as if they're individual flaws of a people. And what it's also designed to do is to erase the work that it takes to make democracy work, to erase the people who have fought for this democracy, to erase the kinds of efforts that it took to make, we hold these truths to be self-evident, to do the work of making it self-evident. So when you have, for instance, the founding fathers as these perfect, hallowed beings who fought against slavery, I'm like, God love a duck on that one. My con law prof used to say that, God love a duck. Because George Washington chased a runaway slave that was Martha's runaway slave all the way up into New England, trying to bring her back onto the plantation. Ona Judge was her name. James Madison scuttled a petition coming out of Pennsylvania that would give Congress the power to destroy slavery. He was like, oh no, Congress does not have this power. Not only does it not have the power, it does not have the right to intervene in what is happening in the states, in the way that slavery is run in the states. And so when you get this kind of emery-boarded history, it's like emery-boarded history of the founding fathers, then you don't understand what folks were up against in terms of making those aspirational language to try to bring it in closer to reality. And it's the struggle we're still in today. This is about whitewashing history, about removing the reality of systemic racism, about treating the calls for justice, for equality, for fairness, as if they're whining, as if it's a call for dependency on the government, as if it is a fatal flaw where folks don't want to do the work, where they don't have initiative. But when you know this history, what you see, so Ocoee, Florida.
I actually know a little bit about this. Because I've been to the museum in Montgomery, and there was actually some really interesting stuff there about Florida, but I'm sorry. But yes, we don't learn that here, by the way.
Right. So Ocoee, right? So in the standards, there's this language about, Yeah, well, there were these massacres, but you also need to talk about when African Americans killed other African Americans or when they killed whites in the process. So in Ocoee, it was, the 19th Amendment got passed, and you had the NAACP working to register Black women in Florida to be able to vote. Well, the Klan rose up and the white domestic terrorists rose up. And they were like, oh no, that issue of political power has nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. So as Black folks went to the polls in 1920, it was a presidential election. They're trying to cast their ballots in Ocoee. The domestic terrorists are swarming around them, terrorizing them, blocking them from the polls. So there was a man named Mose Norman who got blocked. And so he went to a judge in Orlando. That judge told him, go back and document what they're doing, how they're disfranchising you. So we have a case. And so Mose Norman goes back to the polls and he's documenting the harassment, the terror. And so they start chasing him. He runs to his friend's house, July Perry, who's one of the most prominent Black men in Ocoee. The mob descends on July Perry's house, descends on it. And it's really clear they do not have good intentions. July Perry pulls out his gun and he shoots. 2 white men, I believe, go down. July Perry is shot. He is then thrown in jail. The mob goes to the jail, drags him out of that jail, and lynches him. The mob then destroys the Black community. They burn the Black churches, they burn Black businesses, they burn Black homes. African Americans were half of Ocoee's population. By the time whites were done, there were like 0 African Americans in Ocoee for the next 5 decades. We call this ethnic cleansing. When we saw it in Srebrenica in the Balkans, we called it ethnic cleansing. It's what we saw in Ocoee in 1920. So in telling that story, what those standards talk about is that you would talk about the white men who were shot, the mob that were trying to kill July Perry and his family, right? And somehow make that equivalent to the violence raining down on Black folks who had worked hard, who had saved their money, who had built businesses, who had built homes, and who were trying to exercise their rights as American citizens to vote. Part of what we're dealing with is the danger so much of false equivalencies that we're seeing that try to make, for instance, January 6th equivalent to Black Lives Matter protests, right?
Yeah.
Those false equivalencies muddy the water. They muddy clear thinking. And so part of what the standards are about is they're designed to stop the kind of critical thinking. So you have to ask, how is it that you could have a Thomas Jefferson who could write that language and still be consistently raping a teenage girl that he owns and he keeps impregnating her? How do you make those two things make sense? Critical thinking has you asking those questions because to me, it deals with the kinds of fissures in this society. It deals with the differing ways that we come to understand who we are and who we aren't, what we need to be and what we are. And so when Thomas Jefferson writes, I fear for my country that God is just. So there is the acknowledgement that he knows this mess is wrong. This mess is USDA grade A prime beef wrong, but he's not going to stop it.
I think the reason that he wasn't going to, like a lot of others in yesteryear were not going to, is that people still don't realize that the majority of the founding fathers are more like Patrick Henry and less like Thomas Paine. And so as a result, there were these compromises that were put in place to form the nation. And even though a lot of these particular guardrails could have been removed at any time over the course of what ultimately resulted in Civil War, could have been done so much quicker. And then, of course, there's people in the chat who inquire about, well, why did the North leave post Civil War during Reconstruction. And for those of you who are not familiar with the presidential election of 1876, do your homework on that one. That's what basically, listen, Rutherford Hayes is not the worst president we've ever had, but he is of exceptional consequence because of what you want to talk about. A back room, a back cigar room deal was done to basically destroy the South for the next 2 generations. That's essentially what happened, and it could have changed so much quicker.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.